Okay, hello and welcome to our book club. It's been a while. So, this book club is something that I try. Well, I'm going to get back in the swing of it. I used to do it the last Thursday of every month. And of course, it's a different book every month. So, if that's something that you're interested in joining, I guess let me know. You can text notifications. You can text, it's the words Dana Live, all one word, to the number 22999, and you can get notified every time I go live. So, we were doing these book clubs pretty regularly, and then I just kind of fell off doing them, and it's enjoyable. So, normally there's other people with me. This time around, since it was kind of a last minute thing, it's just going to be me tonight. That might change in the future. I know that a lot of people tend to like a more paneled discussion, so I'll see if I can get that back. So let's see if our chat is working. We've been having issues with it the past few nights. So, the book we're going to be discussing tonight is called Stop Walking on Eggshells: Taking Your Life Back When Someone You Care About Has Borderline Personality Disorder. And it's by Paul Mason and Randy Krieger. So, welcome. Hi, Changing My Life. She says, "Hi, Dana. It's great to see you. Third time this week." Yes, I feel like I haven't left. I feel like I'm still here. It's pretty wild. Hey, Fatima says, "I think this is my first time here for book club." Well, welcome. And I'm going to try to get you guys or get a list posted on my website in the next like week or so. So you can, if you are interested in following along with the books, um, then that way you can. But the book, just FYI, that we're reading next month for February 2021 is it's called The Four Agreements. It's a practical guide to personal freedom by Don Miguel Ruiz. So it's a short book. It's powerful. It's been, gosh, probably 15, 20 years since I last read it. So it'll be interesting to go through it again. So um I'm glad you mentioned that. Samantha says, "Oh, I have this book, but I haven't read it yet. I have borderline personality disorder." So let's start there, okay, with this. This book, I guess first and foremost, this book has multiple editions. I haven't read, and I didn't realize that when I got it. I just got the first one that came up on Amazon, and I I don't know what kind of changes they've made down the road. This book, I'm pretty sure I read the first edition. I will say it can, I would imagine if a person has borderline personality disorder, the book can be very offensive. The way the information is presented, and if you listen to it on audiobook, the narrator, I just don't care at all for the narrator's voice. It comes across as very condescending and just very irritated the whole time. Not a fan of that. So I guess kind of know that going into it. To provide some more balance to that, I think it can be helpful to realize that borderline personality disorder, it's a series of traits. And it's a series of traits that we all, like anything else, like any other personality disorder, it's a series of traits that we all have. It's the degree and frequency that can present the problem. It's also on a spectrum ranging from mild to severe, although it's not presented in a spectrum or on a continuum in the DSM. It's sort of like, okay, this is the diagnosis. There is no like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 kind of a thing. So not everybody that has borderline personality disorder is going to have all of these behaviors or challenges. Some might have them in different degrees and frequencies. Some might not have them at all. It just varies wildly. Uh, in addition to that, as I was going through this book, I felt like there was some uh, blurring between borderline personality disorder and other. other things such as narcissistic personality disorder or intermittent explosive disorder. Um, so yeah, again, I just feel like that kind of needs to be said. Um, Samantha says, "Oh, really? Would you say this book is triggering? Is it written for those with BPD or for their loved ones?" It's written it's written for the loved ones of a person with, I would say, pretty extreme BPD. This book really paints the picture of a person with borderline personality disorder as incredibly manipulative, abusive, um, um, immature, kind of difficult, demanding, all of that. And not all people with borderline personality disorder are that way. That's pretty extreme in my personal and professional experience. So even working with families of people that have been diagnosed with BPD, what's presented in this book, um, I would say is yeah, it's on the more extreme end. So just kind of know that some people have BPD, that they're it's not extreme like that. They're not abusive. That their challenges more have to do along the lines with uh, unstable self-image, kind of emotional volatility, uh, um, chronic feelings of abandonment or emptiness, and um, kind of low self-esteem as a result of that. And they're not aggressive. They're not. Um, there's not this extreme level of, um, aggression associated with it. Uh, Huffle Mom says, Dana, should I run the usual public service announcements? Sure, if you want to. I sure. Thank you. Samantha says, yeah, I've been studying DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, so my BPD traits aren't as bad as they used to be. If anything, I relate more to complex PTSD. Yes. And I think with most anything out there, awareness and acceptance is a big chunk of the battle, like probably a good 70% of it. Um, Having certain traits kind of laid out for a person with BPD, it can make things make a lot of sense. Like, oh, okay, this is why I'm feeling this way. Like I'm perceiving pretty much any conflict or confrontation through this lens of my fear of abandonment. And that's where all of this emotional volatility is coming from. So, you know, it, I just, I do think, and maybe there's a book out there that's more presented in a um, kind of balanced, empathetic way, I guess, for people with BPD to identify kind of some imbalanced traits within themselves. So, okay, so kind of with that, I'll jump into it. The book talks about borderline personality disorder, and if you're new here, then we'll kind of cover what that is. So, borderline personality disorder is it's what's known as a personality disorder, and a personality disorder is kind of pervasive, persistent, problematic behavior that's outside the realm of what would be considered normal for a person's age or culture, and it causes problems. Kind of these behavior traits cause problems for them. Oftentimes they're aware that there's problems in their life, but they might not be aware that it's due to their behavior. So the book mentions that originally the name borderline personality disorder was kind of coined because the person was thought to be on the edge or the borderline uh, between neurosis and psychosis. And neurosis is this excessive and irrational anxiety or obsessive thinking, and psychosis, which is a break from reality. They talk in the book that this definition of borderline was discarded in the 1970s, although I hadn't heard that. And when I was taught about borderline personality disorder, that was exactly how it was presented to me. frankly, I still feel like that's pretty accurate. That neuroses, it's that chronic anxiety. It's that chronic anxiety of oftentimes relating to fears of abandonment. And that psychosis, those break from realities, if if we're not aware of kind of that this is that that certain people with borderline personality disorder are walking around and they have this filter that they're perceiving their relationships through. And like I was saying, any type of conflict or confrontation, it's filtered through that lens of, oh my gosh, this person's going to leave me. And I really feel like that's where a lot of what seems like psychotic or psychotic behavior is coming from. That very irrational behavior where things escalate very quickly. And you're like, whoa, how did we get to this point? I just said I needed that I couldn't call you tonight because I had to work late. And now you've gone off on the deep end. You're accusing me of cheating, or you're thinking that I'm going to break up with you or that I don't love you anymore. Like, how did we get here? Kind of a thing. And it's through that lens of abandonment. That's how we got here. This is not the same as what you would find with narcissistic personality disorder, who might accuse a person of kind of similar things, right? But a lot of times that behavior is coming from that place of control, and it's coming from a place of entitlement and um, projection. They start accusing you of things that they're actually doing. So sometimes it can be the same type of behavior, but for different reasons. Yeah. So, okay. Let's see. So, some signs and symptoms of borderline personality disorder is instability of interpersonal relationships, unstable mood or affect, unstable self image, impulsivity starting in early adulthood, such as with shopping, sex, binge eating, reckless driving, etc. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. That was exactly what I was just talking about. Unstable relationships alternating between idealization and devaluation. And we'll get into that here in a little bit, what that looks like. Self-harm and or reoccurrent suicidal behavior. Intense anxiety or irritability, chronic feelings of emptiness, difficulty controlling anger, severe disassociation and or paranoia. And in terms of what causes borderline personality disorder, it's a combination of factors, kind of nature, nurture. Um, a lot of it has to do with environment, borderline personality disorder. There's a lot of overlap with, if you're familiar with different attachment styles, with that anxious style of attachment. And it's so while a person can have kind of this genetic predisposition, like they might just be more sensitive or kind of, yeah, just a more highly sensitive type child. They're not necessarily born with a personality disorder, but they might be born with traits that make them more predisposed to developing borderline personality disorder. Um, but generally, the fears of abandonment, that kind of stuff, it stems from um, uh, well, here's a couple: being a victim of emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, the death of one or both parents, being neglected or abandoned by one or both parents, growing up with another family member who had a serious mental health condition, generally untreated mental health condition. So that person wasn't, so they, I guess the result of that is growing up in a very unstable, unpredictable environment. That which is where a lot of that anxiety comes from. Of uh, oh my gosh, I need this absolute terror of these other relationships, of other people leaving, kind of a thing. So, uh, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Trying to keep up with the questions and go through my notes here at the same time. Embers was saying, I read this book, Stop Walking on Eggshells, about a year ago before my therapist suggested my mom is borderline personality disordered. She was diagnosed as bipolar 30 years ago. She refuses therapy. Any suggestions on how to communicate with her? This is uh, profoundly difficult when somebody is doesn't see that they have a problem is or isn't or isn't motivated to get the help that they need. The thing with therapy is something that we do with somebody else. It's not something that we do to them. So a person just going into therapy, that alone isn't going to really do much. There's techniques that are known as motivational interviewing that can help a person explore kind of ambivalence surrounding uh, kind of problems or problematic behavior in their life to and but the thing with that is obviously it's up to the person, right? Like they have to decide that that's something that they want to work on. So the number one treatment for borderline personality disorder, it's known as DBT, which we talked about a little bit earlier. It's dialectical behavioral therapy. That therapy is um, it's very skills oriented. So it's exercises, it's working on mindfulness, it's working on emotional regulation, it's teaching coping skills, but it's not just kind of teaching or presenting this information. The person, in order for it to work, they actually have to use it and be willing and able to have that level of introspection that um, they can figure out, okay, well, what worked, what didn't work, and why, and how, what kind of changes do I need to make, these kinds of things. So um, in terms of talking to a loved one about it, I I think it can help to present it in a way that doesn't, obviously, that does not feel attacking. So saying something, let's say, for example, if your mom has a lot of, um, kind of emotional ups and downs kind of thing, to mention something along the lines of, this must be very difficult for you to experience kind of all of the emotions at this level. And, have you thought about seeing someone? Have you thought about counseling for this? And present it in a way that it's for her, because really it is. And that might be more of a motivation versus saying, "Gosh, mom, your behavior is just, I can't handle this anymore. I just, and then risking her getting shutting down and then becoming defensive." So presenting it in a way that is out of care and concern for her, um, and maybe even mentioning, hey, there's this therapy. It's called DBT. It's all about skills training and emotional regulation. I've heard it really helps tremendously. Um, and frankly, DBT is a set of skills and it's a structured training. So I frankly think we all could benefit from it. I wish it was taught starting at a young age. So, okay. So I kind of went through the book and I listed out some do's and don'ts that I thought might be helpful. So what should you do or not do if you think a loved one has borderline personality disorder? Um, I think a good do is to have empathy, but and this is very important, within the context of healthy boundaries. So we can absolutely feel for that person. That has to be an extremely difficult way to live, to feel so emotionally volatile and all of that. But that doesn't mean that if we have a person that has the kind of completely unregulated behavior, that we have to allow that into our life. It's okay and appropriate to have boundaries around that. Um, and I guess that was one of the things too with the book. The first like three quarters of the book talks a lot about um, basically understanding borderline personality disorder. Kind of one of the bigger things that I wished the book had covered more was just that validation of it's okay to have boundaries, and it's okay to not want to work on this. with somebody else. It's okay to be discerning with who you have in your inner circle, especially if we're talking about dating. So with family, sometimes that's easier, I think, to set some boundaries and kind of limit contact with, very kind of high conflict or very difficult and demanding um, family members. But my concern with this book was there wasn't really the discussion of you also have the option to just walk away. And a lot of the behavior that they described in the book it was frankly, it was exhausting to read. By the end of it, I was like, oh my gosh, get me out of here. It's so abusive, it's so exhausting, it's an uphill, you're pushing a boulder up the hill every single day with a person that's on that extreme level, who has an absolute meltdown and becomes accusing and attacking and defensive and hostile and towards you, towards the children, towards whatever. You don't need to sit there and try to implement all of these strategies with them. It is okay to have that line where you're like, you know what, this is my limit. And after that, I'm just done. Especially if it's to the point where children are being abused. So, uh, I should say or children are being abused. One of the don'ts is don't define or diagnose someone with BPD. And I see this a lot, and this is just one of the challenges, I think, in part with the English language, in part with how the DSM is written. Um, we see behavior in a person and we're like, oh my gosh, I bet that person has borderline personality disorder. Or we might even, in the middle of kind of one of these conflicts with them, say, like, you know, I think you have borderline personality disorder. Or even if they are officially diagnosed with it, during one of these heated moments, saying, oh my gosh, you're acting so borderline. Or that's just, or and they might even say that, oh, well, this is just I have BPD, I can't help it, that kind of thing. So it's not helpful to focus in these contexts to focus on the diagnosis. It's more helpful to focus on the behaviors, because the result is a person that has the diagnosis might be and oftentimes is inclined to kind of hide behind that and not accept responsibility for their behavior. Well, I can't help it, you know. Um, um, this is just how it is. I have this personality. So I have this mental illness. I'm not responsible for my behavior. That's not true. And um, and then it also comes across as pathologizing. So that's basically when we're kind of weaponizing diagnoses and in defining somebody, which is a form of verbal and emotional abuse. Like, God, you're such a narcissist, right? Or you're such um, a borderline, or you're such a codependent. That's so codependent of you. Like that, in that tone, it's pathologizing and it's meant to come across as diminishing and demeaning, which is at the core of verbal and emotional abuse. Doesn't go over well. Um, Not cool. It's like, don't do that. Do seek help from a skilled provider. So if somebody, especially a loved one, has borderline personality disorder or difficult behavior in general, and especially if they're not motivated uh, to work on it, seeking help from a skilled provider is very, very helpful. So ideally, they would be able to seek help for themselves, but it's also important for those in their inner circle or those around them to seek help for support. Okay, do explain and hold boundaries. And we talked about this in a couple live streams ago, where the acronym JADE, which stands for justify, argue, defend, or explain. And this is something it's kind of passed around as, we don't need to stand there and jade, or we don't need to stand there and justify, argue, defend, or explain our boundaries. I agree with that to a point. When there's a person that has borderline personality disorder, I think it can be very helpful to justify, not argue, but and not defend, but explain. So maybe kind of more explaining than anything, I guess. It's kind of role modeling. This is why I have this limit. It's not to punish you. It's because it's my limit. It's to protect me. It's to so I can guard my time and my emotions. Um, I would encourage you to think about where your limits are too, and to express those to me. So really, kind of using certain moments when it comes to setting boundaries as kind of teachable moments, but like in a non-condescending way. But just realize that this person um, is more likely to be perceiving everything through that lens of abandonment. And so every boundary that we set feels like we're basically breaking up with them or we never want to see them again. And um, so letting them know if you're in a relationship or you have a good rapport with somebody that has borderline personality disorder, um, whenever there is conflict or confrontation, it might help to kind of bookend that conversation. So opening up that conversation with, I just want you to know that I think you're awesome and I love you so much. However, tonight I just need some time alone. I just need some time to decompress. And then following it up with, but I just want you to know that I'll talk to you in the morning or I'll text you later on tonight or whatever it might be. But I love you. But I still love you and I'm still here for you. That can help tremendously decrease their anxiety. So that's that's just a thought. Um, let's see. Let me scroll up here and Samantha asked, does EMDR help people with borderline personality disorder? Wouldn't EMDR be re-traumatizing for them? Uh, it depends on what they're getting EMDR for. So EMDR can be really helpful to explore the core beliefs and to um, and then also to kind of lessen the pain of kind of certain traumatic events. It's not the same as exposure therapy. It's not the same as talk therapy. So in an EMDR session, there isn't, um, or there definitely doesn't have to be any discussion about the event. So, um, but with that said, and we talked a little bit about this last night. So with EMDR, it's let's say for example a person with borderline personality disorder is seeking therapy because now they realize, oh yes, this is exactly what it is. I had this abandonment by my mother. She left me when I was young. I um, was very traumatized by this, and um, uh, so that's what I'm seeking EMDR for. It's important that whoever's doing the EMDR, the therapist that's doing the EMDR, um, I'm sorry, I have to sneeze. Hold on a second. Phew. Excuse me. That that they are making sure um, that that this that this session isn't going to be too much of a deep dive. So there in EMDR, there's what's known as a window of tolerance, and it's basically how much can that person tolerate. You really don't want to go over like 70% of that. So as you're kind of assessing the person, you're seeing, okay, are they a good fit for EMDR? Um, and are they a good fit? And is this, are they at the place where they can work on this particular issue? If they're very traumatized by this particular issue and you can tell, like they're way outside of their window of tolerance. They start talking about it, they're crying, they're hysterical, they're really upset, they're unable to self-soothe, then some work needs to be done, um, helping that person to develop, uh, it's known as resourcing, helping them to develop the skills needed in order to be able to get to a place where they're able to maintain that window of tolerance. So, uh, so yeah. Um, but really, at the end of the day, the it's uh, really DBT, the learning these, learning self-soothing skills, learning mindfulness, learning those skills within DBT are really powerful. EMDR can be, and it probably would be a good idea to do it in conjunction with DBT. So either at the same time or after a person finishes DBT. But again, that's going to depend on the person and the therapist and some other factors there. Um, okay, so we're talking about boundaries. And there's the doorbell. I'm not sure what that's about, but I'm just going to keep talking. Hold, actually, no, they're not going to. I don't know what that is, but they're probably not going to go away. It's probably a delivery. Hold on just a second, guys. I am so sorry. Hold on. Okay, I am back. Let's see, where was I? Okay, so we're talking about boundaries, and sometimes it can help to explain a boundary in the sense of kind of role modeling, um, just more like well-adjusted behavior, and explaining that it's not to punish them, that this is about you, it's not about them. Um, and but in order to do that, and so this book goes into a lot of different techniques about setting boundaries and some skills involved around that. However, if we don't know what healthy boundaries are, it's very difficult to set them. So, one of the ways that you can tell when your boundary is healthy, and let me back up and swap out that word healthy for the word functional. I think that's easier to see it that way. So, a functional boundary is one that works, just like something that's dysfunctional is something that doesn't work. And we can tell if something is functional or working properly in large part based upon how we feel, especially interpersonally. So, when we leave a person or a situation with feelings of maybe irritation, frustration, we're crying, we feel drained, then um, more often than not, it's there's some boundaries on our end that need work. So there's something about that whole situation that isn't working for us. Um, and so it's a lot of times it's trial and error with boundaries. You'll kind of know when you get there, when you're able to maintain peace in your life. So also consistency. Um, and this, I mean, there's just so many challenges here. Uh, Consistency is very helpful when a person has a lot of anxiety, especially if they're anxious about relationships, to be as consistent as possible. That provides structure, it provides routine, um, and it helps relieve those feelings of anxiety. Um, let's see. And again, the first quarter or so of the book talks a lot about manipulative behavior and kind of again but it's difficult, and it talks about the importance to not give in to manipulative behavior, but it's difficult if we don't it's difficult to hold our boundary with manipulative behavior if first we don't really know what having a functional boundary is, and second if we don't know what manipulative behavior is. And so I think a great way to look at manipulative behavior, it's if another person is kind of saying or doing something that's preying upon our emotions of fear, obligation, or guilt. So fear might be fear of consequences, fear of losing the relationship, fear that they might hurt themselves, fear that they might hurt us, fear that they might not pay child support, fear that um, that there's going to be hell to pay with them later on. Obligation. This tends to go a lot with hand in hand with family. I'm your mother. I can't believe you would treat me like this. Or, I can't believe you wouldn't, um, cancel your plans and spend time with me. Look at everything I do for you. That's obligation. Of course, guilt. I think we're all very familiar with that. It's uh, basically trying to get another person to take action by making them feel bad or preying upon those feelings of pity more often than not. Kind of look what everything I do for you. I can't believe you would treat me like this. How can you do this? I love you so much. Or maybe they're crying or these kinds of things. So let me hop. Tammy says, yeah, um, a mom saying something like, I almost died having you. Yeah, things like that. Or I work two jobs to support you. um, or I've tried everything to make you happy, or look at everything that I've done for you kids, kind of a thing. Jack asks, Dana, he says, not only do you pee fast, but you also answer the door fast. Was it indeed a package delivery? Yes, I had to pee in a previous live stream and it was super fast. Yes, but this time around, this was a package delivery. So yes. Uh, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Samantha says, Dana, or asks, Dana, do you believe someone with BPD or CPTSD can study and train to help others in that field of work? I've started an online counseling skills course because of my passion to help others. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a big believer in those. How does the saying go? Something along the lines of, like, if you want to get directions to where you want to go, ask a person who's coming back. Ask a person who's coming back from where you want to be, basically. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in a person um, who's lived with it, because kind of having that cognitive understanding of borderline personality disorder, complex post traumatic stress disorder, alcoholism, you name it. It's one thing, but to actually live it and recover from it is uh, totally different. So, um, yeah, and frankly, I think the most people that have impacted the most change tend to be those who have experienced it. The founder of DBT, Marsha Linehan, um, is was diagnosed with BPD. And that's how she started her journey, was trying to make her life work, and came up with, um, DBT. Alcoholics Anonymous, started by the two Bills. One was a surgeon, one was a stockbroker. They had no training at all in support groups or um, counseling or any of that, recovery, none of that. And look at the movement that they pioneered. So yeah, there's lots of power in personal experience. Absolutely. Let's see. Let me scroll up here. And Jack makes the comment. Yeah, the book does mention in one part about um a person with BPD, kind of using uh, their diagnosis as well, as kind of an excuse, like, oh, well, I can't help it because I have BPD. I just want to say too, this is very common for any diagnosis, especially anything that has to do with behavior. Um, Addiction, of any kind, personality disorders of any kind, mental health disorders in general. And this is kind of the challenge, I think, with mental health disorders is on one hand, getting getting a diagnosis. Well, getting a diagnosis can go one of two ways with somebody. One, it can give them a lot of relief. It can give them validation and clarity of, oh my gosh, this is what's been going on with me. Or it can have the exact opposite effect, and it can it can feel like you just dropped a bomb on their life, and it can feel like, oh my gosh, I knew that I had some challenges. I didn't realize that I had like a personality disorder. That those words are so heavy. It can feel like you're being diagnosed with cancer. And kind of in part for that reason, I think it's really important that practitioners tread lightly when they're talking about personality disorders. I forget what it is, but the rate of um, completed suicide or attempted and completed suicide skyrockets after a person gets discharged from a psychiatric hospital. And I think the large part of that has to do with the fact of they're getting a diagnosis or multiple diagnoses, and they're kind of seeing other people that might have the same diagnosis or diagnoses that are really not doing well. And it can feel like, oh my gosh, is this what I'm destined? Is this going to be my life? And if so, I'm out of here, kind of thing. So there can be also what's known as this identity foreclosure, this feeling of helplessness, of learned helplessness, of um, and not even necessarily learned helplessness, but just this identity foreclosure of nothing I do matters. This is what it is. Um, of, oh my gosh, I have this personality, I have PTSD of, oh my God, and your mind starts kind of recalling all these ideas and images of what it looks like for a person to have PTSD. And oftentimes the examples that we're familiar with are pretty extreme. And it's this idea of maybe a homeless person pushing a shopping cart down the street, muttering to themselves, and they're barely able to keep it together. And it's this feeling of, oh my God, oh my God. There's no hope for me. There's no turning this around. And it's terrifying. It doesn't have to be that way. And oftentimes it isn't that way if a person can get effective help and support. So, so it's not just that the person with BPD is being manipulative. Like I said, a lot of times getting a diagnosis, it just feels like a bomb is dropped in your lap, um, and it can be kind of hard to sort out the person from the diagnosis, I guess, and to start taking steps to change things around. Okay, so let me scroll here and um cha cha cha. I'm scrolling here. Yeah, Jack was saying, yeah, I remember there were passages I could strongly relate to in the book, and it was kind of triggering at the time, but also my narcissistic grandma died that month. So yeah. Yeah, and I will be posting, kind of cleaning up my notes here in the near future and getting them up on my site in about a week or so. If you would like to read the notes. So, let's see. Some other challenges with treating borderline personality disorder that the book covers is that um, I'm just going to call it BPD for short because it's just a mouthful every time. BPD frequently it goes undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, ineffectively treated, or the diagnosis goes unshared. And so some of these points I wanted to address here. And the undiagnosed, oftentimes it's either there's just not access to mental health, um, or the person doesn't want to to get help. They think they can handle it on their own. or that there's not an issue, that other people are the issue. So, and again, I guess kind of putting it into context, it's very difficult for any of us to see our own issues clearly. It's always significantly easier to see the issues of other people clearly, right? So that's part of the challenge, especially if a person's been this way for as long as they can remember. So it's like the saying goes, the last thing a fish notices is the temperature of the water. It's or just the water itself. The last thing a fish notices is the water. And it's because you've been swimming in water all your life. You don't know that there's land, that there's another way of going about things. The misdiagnosis, BPD, is frequently, or I should say PTSD or CPTSD, um, is, I would say, frequently misdiagnosed as BPD, especially with survivors of trauma. If a person is fresh out of um, an abusive relationship, odds are they're going to be experiencing pretty much all of those symptoms. They're extreme emotional volatility, um, anxiety is through the roof, really poor or shifting self image, um, kind of fears of abandonment, really struggling to trust other people, which can come across like um, a fear of abandonment. Um, they're just, their emotions are all over the place, and that's a trauma response. It's not necessarily a personality disorder. Personality disorder, it's like I was mentioning before, it's pervasive and persistent, so it's long lasting behavior that's been going on for a while, generally since the person was probably a teenager or at least young adult. And this kind of stuff starts in childhood. So, and the book talks about this a little bit. There's an example they give, and I wish I'd written it down, something about a 2-year-old who was manipulative and difficult and demanding and really volatile and just a handful, to put it mildly. And the book was talking about diagnosing children with BPD, um, and kind of how that's controversial. And it is. Again, I don't remember what year the version that I read, was written, but normally with that kind of behavior in children, um, that isn't so much borderline personality disorder. It's normally like what's known as reactive attachment disorder. So, which tends to be oftentimes a precursor to disorders later on, such as borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder. If it's not, there's not effective interventions that are being done. So, um, yes, okay. Ineffectively treated. Um, talk therapy is only going to go so far with BPD. It's really learning new skills. So a lot of psychoeducation and skills training, like within DBT. And then they also mention that the diagnosis goes unshared. And I thought this was a really important point to touch on, because a lot of people, myself included, when I first got tangled up with a very sociopathic person, it's this feeling of, well, gee, I didn't, had I known that they were a sociopath, or had I known that this person had borderline personality disorder, I would have done things differently. So because I didn't know, then um, you know, it's sort of like wait, kind of, I needed the diagnosis in order to give me the clarity to do something different. Like I said, I completely get that. I had a friendship in middle school and high school that was, I don't even know what that was about. Narcissism and or bipolar, just really, really difficult person. And, I had that mindset of, well, everybody's kind of created equal. And if there's difficulties in the friendship, then I'll just kind of double down and work harder at making things work. And that did not work. And things just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so it was very much an aha moment, fast forward 15, 20 years later, when I became a psychiatric nurse, and then later when I became a therapist, that, oh, like, there's different disorders out there, and that explained a lot of her behavior. And but the reality is, while a diagnosis can be helpful, it can be very add a lot of clarity and a lot of validation. If we have if we have functional boundaries, we don't need a diagnosis, because we have our limits regardless. We don't need to figure out what's going on with that other person. We don't need to figure out their intentions. We don't need to figure out if there's a diagnosis. We don't need to examine their childhood. None of that needs to be about figuring them out. It's all about having healthy boundaries. It's about figuring us out and where our lines are and what's working for us and what's not working for us, and taking the action needed to have situations be nourishing instead of just completely draining or crazy making or exhausting or anxiety inducing or any of that. So, um, okay, so let's see here. Let's talk about the idealization and devaluation. So you see this too in um, people that are very high on the narcissism scale. And this is known as splitting. And it's when a person goes back and forth between idealizing and devaluing another person. Um, although with I would say with BPD, it tends to be more back and forth. Whereas with narcissists, it's not so much that they think that their thinking is idealizing and devaluing. It's um, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. It's different. Um, let me see if I can give you some examples here. So, idealizing and devaluing is thinking a person, it's black or white, very all or nothing thinking. A person is either, oh, you're so wonderful, or you're horrible. You're perfect, or you're profoundly flawed. You're, uh, my soulmate, or you're the devil, kind of a thing. There is no middle ground. And the problem with that extreme kind of thinking, is that none of it's accurate. That the reality is, we live life in gray areas, and a person can be multiple things at once. They can be a very attentive parent, but they can also at times be neglectful. On vice versa, they can be very neglectful the vast majority of the time, and they can have times of being kind or generous or attentive. And because when a person's behavior, a person, people aren't like 100% bad or 100% good. They're not 100% mean, they're not 100% nice. And that can be very confusing when we start trying to kind of make sense of what we're experiencing. With a person with BPD, it might be more of, oh, there's this idealization of, oh, you're so wonderful, you're the best, the most wonderful, caring person I've ever met in my entire life. And then if there's any real or perceived feelings of abandonment, you need some space, you want to go have a girls weekend or a guys weekend, you whatever it might be, then all of a sudden you're in, enemy number one. I can't believe you would do this to me. I cared about you so much. There can be this lashing out. Not always. And there's a lot of people that I know that have borderline personality disorder that wouldn't share any of those hurt feelings, and they would just sit there and cry. They wouldn't go into that devaluation. That it's, if anything, they devalue themselves. Oh, I knew I wasn't worthy. I knew that they would leave. I knew that there was something wrong with me. And oh my gosh, I just messed up the best thing I ever had. So again, like this idealization and devaluation of going from you're amazing to you're horrible. Um, I don't know. It's more on the extreme end, I think, of BPD, and it it definitely is there too with narcissists of, oh, but with narcissists, it's more of, it's not related to fears of abandonment. It's more of a, uh, oh, you're doing everything that I think you should be doing, or you're doing everything that you're agreeing with me completely, kind of a thing. So, oh, you're so wonderful because we're so in sync. But as soon as you kind of question them or, um, have a differing opinion or whatever, then all of a sudden, no, you're a moron, you're foolish, you're this, you're that. And it's very extreme. But the difference is that kind of behavior with BPD, it's coming from that, oftentimes that fear of abandonment and from a place of self-protection, out of, um, it's coming from a place of hurt, of, oh my gosh, you're going to leave, and I thought I could trust you. I thought I that you would that you would still, that you were going to be different, that you were going to be good to me, and now you're not. Whereas versus narcissism, it's more of that loss of control and the how dare you. It's that entitlement of, and that attitude of superiority. um it's it's an anger response, it's not a hurt response, I guess is what I'm saying. With BPD, it's looking towards others to give them an identity, self-esteem, and approval. So, and it says many people with BPD are searching for an ever-present and ever-perfect nurturing caregiver that will fill this hole inside of them. And anything less than this can feel abusive to them. So, what you can do about this is realize that it is impossible to fill another person's wants and needs completely, regardless of whether or not they have BPD or not. It's impossible for us to meet somebody else's needs. That's on them to get their needs met. It's too much for it to be on another person. It's also important that you keep a balanced view of yourself and not internalize their extremes. So, for example, this is very difficult. This is difficult for adults to do in a relationship, but it's next to impossible for children. And this is one of the big challenges, that children who grow up with a BPD parent, or a parent that really oscillates between idealization and devaluation, is realizing, um, that this behavior, it's not a reflection of them, it's a reflection of the person doing the idealizing and devaluing. And so this, kind of struggle with identity, struggle with self-esteem, struggle with approval tends to be the result of not receiving that in childhood. So there might be uh, a parent. I think you could also, this could also stem from being bullied too. So any type of like really, uh, kind of relationship trauma early on, I guess you could say, that's going to negatively impact how a person sees themselves and their place in the world. So, for children that have this, who grew up with a lot of very conditional love, the the message that they receive about that is, it's sort of like, okay, well, then you need to be what other people want if you want to be accepted by them, instead of learning how to get grounded within yourself and figuring out, okay, well, what are your wants, your needs, your thoughts, your feelings, your opinions, getting comfortable with yourself and having, and with that comfort, realizing, hey, you know what? If I interact with other people, if they don't like me, I might have hurt feelings, but that doesn't have to further diminish my self-worth. It just means that we're not a good fit. And that might kind of hurt, but say lovey, kind of a thing. Versus a person who doesn't have that boundary in place, who spent their whole life compromising and erasing parts of themselves in order to be accepted. Yet another rejection, they internalize that so deeply, and it just further feeds that feeling of, oh, I knew it. I knew I wasn't enough. I knew I wasn't lovable. And it just further diminishes their self-esteem. So Let's see. Let me scroll up here and see what's going on in the chat. That's a very valid point. Jack is saying men tend to be diagnosed more with ADD, while women tend to be diagnosed more with BPD. Both cases could potentially be misdiagnosed as psychiatric trauma. And they can also go hand in hand. So there's definitely that level of like comorbidity of more than one thing going on at a time. So a person could have ADD and BPD and PTSD and anxiety, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and OCD and bipolar and. Um, Hopefully they wouldn't have that many because that's a lot, but it it can be a thing. So sometimes it's not one or the other, sometimes it's both. But sorting out what's what can absolutely be challenging. And a lot of this has to do with kind of some hidden biases that we all have about behavior and who can be a certain way. I think it's much more common for men to be diagnosed with when there's emotional volatility involved as either um, bipolar or intermittent explosive disorder or potentially even ADD, yeah. Um, or if there's, um, or even antisocial personality disorder, depending on other behavior. So, yeah, it's been rare. I mean, I can count on one hand how many men I've worked with over the years that have been diagnosed with BPD. And that's saying a lot because when I was a psychiatric nurse, we had our regular patient load was close to 800, and that was continually changing. So it's been thousands upon thousands of people that I've worked with over the years, and um, BPD was in men was few and far between. So um, let's see. Oh, okay. I also wanted to talk about a topic called identity diffusion. So, and I forget, I'll have to look it up. There was a person who developed these different types of, it's like the process of identity, of forming identity. And it's absolutely brilliant. If somebody wants to Google it real quick, let me know. But and it's so one of the stages in this of figuring ourselves out is identity diffusion. And with these different stages, there's kind of like loose age limits for them. Of okay, a person tends to go through identity diffusion, let's say, teen years to early 20s. This is the stage of trial and error, figuring things out. You're trying different careers. It's very experimental. You're figuring out who you are. And that's a necessary and an important stage in identity development. Like I'd mentioned before, this stage of identity foreclosure is another one of these kind of, it's not really a stage, but kind of where the formation of identity can get stalled, I guess, maybe is a way to put it. Um, so identity diffusion, it's normally something that we figure out and move forward in. And Uh, but with a person with BPD, if they don't know who they are, because really core parts of themselves have never been validated, then they stay in that stage of identity diffusion. And if you remember, but during those years of not knowing who you really were, what you wanted to do in life, all of this finding yourself, that's a really stressful and anxiety inducing period in somebody's life. Now imagine always being in that stage. It's it's anxiety inducing to even think about it. It's a lot. So the result is that a person that's in that identity diffusion stage, they're very dependent upon other people as far as cues as to how to behave or what to believe. This makes them very prone to manipulation because they're very susceptible to kind of going along with others in order to get along. And they tend to feel panicked or empty when alone. Um, their identity oftentimes comes from outside of themselves. They may take on the mannerisms or behaviors of those around them. I remember once I read a book. It was like a book of quotes. This was 20 something years ago. It was a long time ago. And I think it was Coco Chanel who said something about um, kind of having an identity outside of just name brands and nice things. She made a comment something along the lines of, if you were to lose, like, don't be the woman whose identity is about like an Hermes scarf. Um, if you lost everything in a fire, who would you be? Something along those lines. And that always just really resonated with me of that's really interesting that there's people out there whose identity is in that. It's in a car, it's the BMW, or it's brand names, or it's maybe the lack of brand names. It's having kind of this perfectly sculpted life of that this is them. But if you take away all of that, there's this panic of I don't know who I am. One of the I think one of the key takeaways, key takeaways from this book and with borderline personality in general is there is a difference between physical age and emotional age. And not just with BPD, but in general. So you might have seen this if you are a big fan of YouTube, watching different creators out there. You're like, gosh, this person acts like they're 14 and they're 34. This is wild to me. I cannot believe that you've got adults here that are like this is what they're doing. Like this is how they're living their life. And what you're seeing, it's the difference between that physical age and the emotional age. So it can be helpful to realize that when what you're dealing with when you're interacting with another person is their emotional age, and to try to keep that in mind. So it's very helpful. And I think that's part of the frustration is it was with, especially with BPD, it's this feeling of, well, gosh, you're 30 years old or you're 50 years old. You need to act like it. Well, if it was that easy, then people would. But if a person's at this kind of stunted at this different emotional age of development, if they're 14 emotionally, then they're 14 emotionally. And um, they have a lot of catching up to do. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into helping that person transition into adulthood. So again, um, I think it's helpful to understand these things, but it's okay also to have boundaries and be like, wow, okay, now that I'm seeing this stuff clearly with certain relationships in my life, I need to have some boundaries with that, or I need to change my expectations, or a little bit of both. I think it can help to kind of change our expectations and realize, oh, okay, yeah, if you've got a BPD mom, of okay, her behavior is that of maybe a 14-year-old. She's 78, and I'm going to kind of adjust my expectations, and I'm going to expect her to behave like a 14-year-old because that's what she's done up until this point. That doesn't mean that I have to like it or tolerate it or any of that, but it will set you free if you can accept if you can, it's known as meeting other people where they are. If you can see and meet another person where they are, but then adjust your own boundaries and behavior accordingly. So we tend to get upset when we're fighting reality and we think reality should be different than it is. Well, she's 78. She should act like she's 78. Well, yeah, okay, I agree, but that's not the case. So then what are we going to do? And trying to, push her to act her age isn't going to do anything but frustrate you and annoy her. So, okay, let's see. Let me scroll down. Okay, here's another, I thought, really great point in the book. They talk about communicating one limit at a time. And So when you are setting boundaries with anybody, really, it helps to not have your frustrations stack up to the point of you're to the point of attacking another person, basically. Of, oh, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do this and you do this wrong and you this, and you're just kind of laying out this whole laundry list of everything wrong with them. That never goes over well. So instead, if a boundary has been crossed, then communicating that one limit to that person and staying on topic of, um, I'm trying to think of what something might be. Oh, I told you that, tonight I needed some alone time. I was going to just veg out and watch a movie. I've had a long week and I just kind of need to be alone. And, but you texted me multiple times and, uh, you weren't giving me my space. And so I'm feeling really frustrated and kind of violated by that because that was my limit. And, um, you kept crossing it. So addressing that and staying on topic. So a person emotional immaturity coupled with, uh, feeling attacked and maybe not having the skills to, address that, their kind of natural inclination is going to be to get defensive and shift the conversation off of them. So they might start talking about everything you've done wrong in the past week, and maybe everything that you've done wrong, but that they've let slide. Well, I didn't mention it when you didn't do the dishes. And well, I paid for, uh, I bought us pizza the other night, and they're kind of like they're kind of building a case as to why they're not a bad person, right? But the reality is your issue has nothing to do with everything they did or didn't do, um, for you or for the family. Your issue is this is the limit of I needed my alone time and I'm feeling really frustrated and violated that you couldn't give it to me, that you continued to text me. And that's a big boundary violation for me. And so if they do start deflecting and or getting defensive, to say, okay, you know what? It sounds like you've got some frustrations too. We can address all of that, but let's discuss one issue at a time. Let's finish this one about my, needing some alone time and this boundary cross, and then we'll go on to what you want to discuss. This is much easier said than done, because in the moment it can get very, very heated, and it can be exhausting when a person's not necessarily solutions oriented, but instead they want to kind of keep stating their case, or they're wanting to build a case against you, or they are shifting the topic around that kind of stuff. It's crazy making, and it's, um, you know not effective communication, and it's a lot of emotional immaturity. So, okay, with BPD2, another big thing is hypervigilance. So they're always on the lookout for signs another person's going to leave or doesn't really love them after all. And this is kind of the great irony within BPD, is that they desperately crave intimacy and a relationship with others, but all of, this kind of obsessive, maybe paranoid, anxiety driven behavior, where they're in this mad scramble to get in touch with you. They want to communicate with you. They want to make sure everything's okay. It's smothering, and it can really push a lot of people away. So, let me scroll down. The book talks about the difference between what you say and what is heard by the BPD person. And I was reading some of the reviews in Amazon, and, um, just because I don't know, I'm always curious to know what kind of people have to say about books and everything. Anyways, so a couple of reviews had mentioned that, they felt like the book was presenting it, and that it was more of a hearing issue or like a psychological issue, that literally what the BP heard is different than what was said, and that's not true. They hear the same words, all of that. However, they perceive them and internalize them. The meaning that they assign to those words is different. So you might say, "Hey, you know what? I had a rough night. I'm going to just order some pizza and veg out. I'll call you tomorrow." What they might perceive that to mean is, I'm tired of you. I want to break from you. I don't love you. And I'm half tempted to leave. So that's that filter of abandonment that a lot of messages, especially needing time, space, or setting boundaries, saying no, that can be how it comes across with for a person with BPD. So, what you can do in that situation is reminding yourself that it's okay to set limits and to have wants and needs, and that it's really not your job to make others okay with your decisions. So, if the other person, starts crying and they're like, "I love you, and why are you pushing me away?" and they want to discuss this and on, it's okay to hold your limit and say, you know, I and kind of reiterating, I had a long day. I just want to I'm going to order a pizza and I'm going to watch a movie and I'm going to do nothing. And we can talk all about this tomorrow. I love you very much. I'm not going anywhere, but I just need to decompress and be alone. So it's okay to hold your boundary. You don't need to have this lengthy conversation with them justifying your position or reassuring them or any of that. Um okay, let's see. Let me scroll down here. Okay, so another point they bring up is unrealistic or inappropriate boundaries and expectations. This a lot of this has to do with kind of emotional immaturity and um, in the spheres of abandonment. So the result you might see is parentification, where you have an adult with borderline personality disorder turning their child into the adult, into their caregiver, and they're becoming the child. So it's the parent that goes crying to the kid of, "I'm so scared. Why am I so unlovable? Um, just tell me it'll be okay. You won't leave me, will you? Promise me you'll go to college locally. You can't leave me. What am I going to do without you?" That kind of stuff. That's parentification and it's considered child abuse. So you might also see threatening or engaging in self harm. Uh, Kind of oftentimes, well, sometimes it's used as a way to self soothe, but sometimes it's used as a way of manipulation. If you don't, um, there might be direct threats. It could be, if you don't call me back, I'm going to kill myself, or if you don't call me back, I'm going to start drinking. It could be, um, and they might not come right out and do it. It might just be, well, fine then. I guess if you don't want to talk to me, then I'm just going to go out and drink. Or fine then. I guess if you do that, then I'm just going to go do this. I'll show you, kind of a thing, is the message there. Um, the book mentions, and I love this, that there is a difference between supporting someone and supporting their problematic behavior. So this is where boundaries come into to play. And continuing, so this is a quote taken directly from the book that I really liked. "Continuing to support the damaging behavior of others enables it and encourages it to continue, thereby perpetuating our own suffering." And that's very well said. It can be difficult to untangle from that, especially if there's this long-standing pattern of, anytime you don't do what they want, they accuse you of not loving them, of nobody loving them. They'll um, they just kind of crumple. Um, it can be difficult to see another person in a space like that, but at the same time, realizing the solution to this isn't giving in and letting them have their way. Really, in the long run, that's hurting them even more, because not everybody's going to do that for them. Plus, it keeps that behavior going, because then they learn, oh, this works. So I'll just keep doing that. There's no motivation to change if whatever they're doing is continuing to work for them. So, um, let's see here. They articulated this one point well. It's the difference between basing facts on feelings or basing feelings on facts. And so, in general, emotionally healthy people base their feelings on facts. So, for example, your dad comes home drunk, fact, you're worried or concerned, feeling, versus a person with BPD who might, um, they kind of give a, I wish I would have given the same example. Person with BPD might do the opposite. For example, husband tells wife he's going out with the guys after work for a drink. Wife feels anxious, jealous, and rejected. She concludes her husband's actions are bringing on these feelings and accuses him of valuing his friends more and having a drinking problem. So there's a situation. He's going to go out with the guys. She has feelings about it, anxiety, jealousy, and rejection. And then she works backwards, and then those feelings then become facts. Well, because I feel this way, therefore, you must value your friends more than me. You must have a drinking problem. You must not love me. So I thought they did a good job of kind of parsing that out and explaining the difference there. A person with BPD tends to take on what's known as projective identification, which is taking on the projection of others as truth. Children are particularly vulnerable to projective identification. So, for example, if you have uh, uh, a parent who is, um, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say they don't like your parent doesn't like their weight or their appearance, and they're continuing to pick on you about your appearance in some way, shape, or form. If and there might not be anything wrong with your appearance. This is where it gets really wild. So, uh, when we're engaging in that projective identification, it's taking on those projections of another person as truth. And that can be very damaging for anybody, but especially for children, because then that child really grows up with just assuming that this is in fact true. An example of this is that comes to mind is my mom. So her father, who was very narcissistic, used to quote unquote tease her about her ears. There's nothing wrong with her ears. Her ears perfectly normal. They're not big, they're not small, they don't stick out. Like they're just kind of run of the mill ears, right? Uh, to this day, she will not wear her hair up. She will not wear her hair short to where her hair has to cover her ears because she still thinks that she has big ears. She does not. So it was his way of teasing her. He might have had issues with his ears. Now, he had some big ears. So there's a very solid chance that he was kind of projecting his own insecurities onto her. Uh, yeah. So, okay, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Um, okay, Bonnie was saying, I swear this was one of the first books that spelled out boundaries in a way I could understand. And we're getting to that part. There was a lot about boundaries towards the tail end, which I thought were fantastic. Okay, let me scroll down here. Some of the takeaways that I had from their section on boundaries was that, limits, boundaries, help us clarify our relationships with others. It's understanding where we start and end and where another person starts and end, kind of who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what, and there's a start and end to that accountability and to that responsibility, to thoughts and feelings and all of that. And um, without those limits, without understanding that it's healthy and appropriate to understand that there's a start and end, without that, there's this very blurred boundaries. There's enmeshment to the level of other people. They don't know what they feel because they're used to feeling their parents' feelings or their spouse's feelings. There's a blurring there of feelings. There's a blurring there of accountability. There's a blurring there of responsibility. It's this idea of, oh, you're upset. I need to make you feel better. Oh, you're, uh, you know, I don't, you've got some sort of abusive or destructive behavior. I need to be the one to fix it. And instead of being like, well, um, especially as an adult, that's your behavior. And so you need to be accountable and responsible for it. That I can be there to support you, or encourage you, but I can't fix it. I can't carry you across the finish line. That doesn't work. And even if it did, then it's still damaging because then we're cheating another person out of figuring it out for themselves. So, okay, boundaries. This is another good one. Boundaries. It's not a one-time event. It's not a one and done thing. It's an ongoing process, and it's not just something that we do with certain people. It's it's everybody. If any relationship in our life is going to work, it's going to be because of our boundaries, not in spite of them. That's so, so, so important. And a relationship doesn't even really begin to take form until we're able to start setting boundaries. Until that point, if we're not able to set boundaries, if our way of relating to other people is just to let them have their way, then there really isn't a relationship there. It's it's us going with the flow, kind of being a yes man or woman. And that's, uh, we don't really know if the person likes us for who we are because we haven't let ourselves be known. We haven't let our limits be known. And so for authentic relationships to happen, boundaries and assertive communication have to be there. Let's see. There was a quote here from Melanie Beatty, who's the author of the very famous book, Codependent No More, who says, setting boundaries is about learning to take care of ourselves no matter what happens, where we go, or who we are with. Boundaries are rooted in our beliefs about what we deserve and don't deserve. Boundaries originate in a deeper sense of our rights, especially the right to be ourselves. Boundaries emerge as we learn to value, trust, and listen to ourselves. Boundaries naturally flow from our conviction that what we want, need, like, and dislike is important. Boundaries are not about other people, they are about protecting ourselves. And I love that. So that kind of goes back into what I was talking about earlier in the book about how, early on in the book, a person had said, oh, well, I'd never heard of borderline personality disorder, kind of making it sound as though, well, they had this diagnosis, but they didn't share it for me. And because I didn't have their diagnosis, I, I didn't have healthy boundaries with them. So I hope now that you can see that that's problematic thinking, that it doesn't matter what diagnosis a person may or may not have, that it's our boundaries are our boundaries are our boundaries, regardless of if we're with a parent, a child, a priest, a neighbor, a coworker, a person that has a personality disorder, a therapist, a person that's well adjusted, you name it. It's boundaries are boundaries are boundaries are boundaries. So in a way that can take a lot of the pressure off of you don't have to figure out the person's intentions or why they're doing what they're doing. You just have to get in tune with where your boundaries are. Um, let's see here. Talked about this part. They mentioned some of the core principles of Al-Anon, which I also really liked. First one is we are not responsible for another person's behavior, disease, or recovery from it. Number two, we let go of our obsession for the other person's behavior and begin to lead lives, happier lives with dignity and rights. Number three, we learn not to suffer because of the actions or reactions of another. Number four, we don't allow ourselves to be used or abused by others in the interest of their recovery. Number five, we don't do for others what they can do for themselves. So very powerful, very, very powerful. I just, yay. If I could give a round of applause for that, I absolutely would. It's just fantastic. A lot of this has to do with understanding appropriate accountability. And when we're able to see and assign appropriate accountability, a lot of these feelings of misplaced guilt dissipate because we're able to see, oh, this person's demand or request that I somehow take care of them or keep secrets, um, or that I'm put in no-win situations um, or any of this. Like, this is not appropriate, and I will not do that. And if they're upset about that, then they need to be able to handle their feelings. I can't handle their feelings for them. So, and then the part about not letting go of our obsession about the other person's behavior and beginning to lead happier lives with dignity and rights. This is a big shift in healing for people across the board that are healing from whatever type of dysfunctional relationship. It's realizing that we don't need to figure out a diagnosis, the person's childhood. Um, if they had why are they acting the way they're acting? Did they have a bad day? Did they have a bad week? Did they have a bad childhood? Do they, is it bipolar? Is it this? Is it that? Um, all of that stuff might be somewhat interesting, but at the end of the day, our boundaries are our boundaries are our boundaries. And it's up to us to be self-protective and to really value and guard peace, having peace in our life. Okay, so some of the tips that the book has in setting boundaries, this actually comes from another book that they quoted. It's called The Essential Family Guide to BPD, and it's known as the 5 C's. And the first one is clarify your limits. The second one is to calculate the cost of not having this limit. And I'll go through these here in a second. The third is come up with consequences, and the consequence should match the limit. Number four, create a consensus. In other words, get the family, if it's a family issue, get the family in agreement. So you're all pulling on the same side of the rope here. Number five, consider outcomes. So first one, clarify limits. So like I mentioned, if you've got a person that violates your boundary, making it known. I said I need time alone tonight. I'm just going to sit and watch a movie. They call you multiple times because they're in some sort of crisis or because they're lonely or because of whatever, or they show up at your doorstep, whatever it might be, reinforcing that limit of, no, I said, or if it's with a person that has a substance use issue, saying, you know what, I said I'm not going to loan you any more money, or that I'm not going to bail you out of jail, or that, um, no, you can't come over here and crash until you sober up. Like, that's the limit. So number two, calculating the cost of not having this limit. I love this because the reality is we might be thinking if we don't have a boundary or like we don't want to set a boundary because we don't want to rock the boat. But the reality is there's a cost to every action that we take or that we don't take. And so if we're not setting this limit with this person, what is the cost? It's more than likely going to be frustration, anger, resentment on our part. It might be rocking the boat with our spouse. or somebody else. So what does it mean? What's it going to look like? Like play the situation out. What is it going to look like if you don't set this boundary? Come up with consequences. So if those limits are crossed, then coming up with some sort of consequence, or what are you going to do different? And again, this isn't to punish them, it's to protect yourself. So the consequence, um, uh, might be something like, I need some more space. I said that I'm not going to loan you money anymore. I'm really concerned about your drug habit and or how you are towards the children. You're you're verbally and emotionally abusive towards them, and I said that I would not. Excuse me. And I made. Hold on. Let me just get a drink of water. Ah, I think that's better. That's better. Okay. So saying, I said that this is not okay, that we don't talk like that. We don't interact like that in our home. We don't yell, we don't cuss, we don't threaten, we don't intimidate, we don't do this in our house. And if you're going to behave like this, then you're not going to be welcome over here anymore. And if they're like, well, but those are my grandkids, I can't believe you're going to keep my grandkids away from me. And they start going off, continuing to hold that line of, we said, this is where we will not tolerate this in our home. And we're not punishing you. We're protecting our children. This is our boundary here. We're not keeping you away from your grandchildren. Your behavior is keeping you away from your grandchildren. And then releasing feelings about that. Like, I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm not going to feel bad about it. This consequence is due to their behavior. It's not just me trying to control them. This is not working. This is not safe for us. So getting family in agreement. If this is in that kind of a situation, it might be a husband and wife, for example. So let's say if it's the husband's mother and he's grown up with it, he's very intimidated by it. He tends to let his mom just steamroll over him. And you agree ahead of time, okay, you know what? If your mom throws a fit again, she's not welcome over here anymore. And maybe that's the consequence, but then, and maybe she does leave, right? But then the husband is somehow allowing he's sneaking the kids over to her house, um, saying that they're at an overnight or at a birthday party, or somehow not telling you. That's a problem. This is where this kind of destructive, dysfunctional behavior, um, there's a ripple effect to it. And so getting very clear with, okay, if we're gonna draw the line, then we need to hold the line as a team. It's not going to work if one of us is kind of the weakest link in the chain here. So, and then consider outcomes. Be prepared. Things get better. Things get worse before they get better. When a person, especially a person who's not used to having limits, starts getting limits, it does feel like they're trying to be controlled, or that other people are being abusive. Expect them to lash out. It will not go over well. So hold the line, be uh, kind of pleasant, be polite, be be brief and to the point of kind of, this is what it is, this is why it's a problem. We're not doing this. We can't have this in our life. So I thought that was good. In terms of talking to a person with BPD, really anybody with problematic behavior, there's another acronym that they recommend, and it's called DEAR, DEAR. And that stands for describe, express, assert, and reinforce. So describe is describing the situation in an objective way, like you would a police report. So you're not assuming the person's intention or emotion. You're not saying, oh, they were just really upset because I took the night off, and um, they were jealous. That's what it was. They were jealous and insecure, and in this. We don't know. We don't know what another person's emotions and intentions are because we're not inside their head. We might have some very accurate guesses, but they're still guesses. So being very like emotionally neutral when we're describing and objective when we're describing the situation of, because the reality is nobody likes to be told what they're thinking or feeling or what their intentions are. So saying something along the lines of, well, you seemed to be upset, or you appeared really upset. Um, and I'm, you know, uh, you seemed, so let's say, for example, you set the limit of, okay, you know what, had a rough day at work. I'm just going to order a pizza and watch a movie and call it a night. And they get kind of huffy. And let's say they even accept the limit and they're like, okay, fine. Talk to you later. Bye. Like, okay. It's kind of an icy reception to the limit that you sent, right? So let's say the next day you decide, okay, I think we need to have a conversation about that. It's not okay with me. I don't like feeling like I being punished whenever I set a boundary. So bringing it up to them and say, you know what? You seemed kind of upset last night when I said I needed some alone time. And they'll say, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. That's not true. Or I was fine. And they're gaslighting basically. So then, saying, well, and here's, um, kind of saying, well, okay, well, here's why I was thinking that you were upset. Is the conversation was really short. You kind of answered me in just a few short words. You were very abrupt. And uh, I feel like that's something that we need to talk about. So E is express, expressing your feelings and opinions. So not saying, oh, well, you made me feel this way. You made me angry. You made me sad. Owning your feelings, saying, you know what, I felt sad and scared when um, I told you I needed some alone time, and um, you gave me just a few short answers and then hung up the phone. And I was left worrying about our relationship and worrying about this conversation that we're having right now. And then assert your limits. So uh, this is your personal preference, and coming at it from a place of, this is my personal preference, not from a place of, well, this is how adults behave. All right, like that's condescending and doesn't go over well with anybody. So for an example, saying something like, I do care about your feelings and I want to resolve difficulties. If conversations get heated, then I might need to stop talking until I'm able to calm down. This is something I need to do for me. And if the person with BP argues about it or wants to debate about it, resist getting pulled into a debate or an argument. Just repeat your assertion. I hear what you're saying, but this kind of behavior just doesn't work for me and I need it to stop. So nipping that in the bud. You don't need to roll around in the mud trying to prove your point until the conversation doesn't need to end once they accept your boundary. Just making your boundary known. And sometimes it might come down to, you know what, this conversation's not getting anywhere. I think we need to take a time out. Or um, I need to take a time out. Let's revisit this conversation another time. But again, be prepared for them to not accept that. Uh, uh, Although, again, that kind of behavior, I feel like that's a lot more common with those that are more on the narcissistic side of the spectrum. They just want to argue and argue and argue, and there's no constructive criticism. There's no way but their way, kind of a thing. And this is why it can be so powerful to just disengage. Like, you don't have to entertain this. You don't have to sit there and have this conversation until they decide it's over. You can absolutely say, you know what, it seems like we're not getting anywhere. And I hear that you're frustrated, and I'm frustrated. And I just don't think we're going to have this conversation is not going to get resolved tonight. So I need to go to bed or I need to go and let's talk about this another time. Um, Also, I should add with the person with BPD, when there is an argument like that, it can help to phrase it like that. If your level of frustration is so high, and they're coming in, um, especially if they're not being defensive, if they're just really having a kind of an emotional meltdown and they're having a difficult time when you're trying to hold your boundary or you're finding yourself getting frustrated, just reminding them of, you know what, this I feel like we're not getting anywhere with this tonight. I still love you very much. I'll talk to you in the morning, okay? And that can sometimes really help to diffuse the situation of reminding them that you can feel two ways at one time. Whereas if they're still operating from that child mindset doesn't understand that. That child mindset is either you love me or you hate me. You're either happy or you're sad. There isn't this ability to kind of juggle multiple emotions at the same time, and it is right. It's possible. I love you very much. I'm really frustrated right now. I love you so much, and I'm really tired right now, and I can't have this conversation. So and then R stands for reinforce. So reinforcing the benefits of your limits if appropriate. Make it clear that you're not acting against them, that you're acting for yourself. So another point to consider, and I love this, is so accurate. Refuse to be put in no-win situations. This is especially true if a person is um, wanting you to keep secrets that are putting them at risk, especially if we're talking about uh, self-destructive, well, really any secrets that are putting them in harm's way, but potentially if they're feeling suicidal, if they're engaging in some self-harm, that's really putting them at risk. These kinds of things, it's not fair to say, oh, I feel like I want to end my life, or I just took a bunch of pills, or um, I just don't want to be here anymore. A lot of BPD kind of stuff, it can be that push pull. It can be like, oh, how much do you care? Will you chase me? Kind of thing. Oh, you broke up with me. Well, I guess I'm just gonna go, drink. Um, I guess I'm just gonna end it all. And they're kind of vague in their wording, and then they hang up, and then they won't answer the phone. That kind of stuff. In those types of situations, I'm a big fan of you call 911. So don't be put in no-win situations, and make it very clear to that person of, I don't appreciate that. That's holding another person emotionally hostage. And you calling 911, it's not to punish them. It's the fact of, I don't want to live with this. Like, if you need help, then you need help. Me keeping a secret that you're like actively going to kill yourself isn't me doing you any favors. So I'm not going to do that. Uh, let's see here. So they included a part in one of my all-time favorite books. It's the book The Verbally Abusive Relationship by Patricia Evans. And in this book, Patricia Evans covers rights within a relationship. And some of the rights that they included in their book was the right to emotional support, the right to encouragement, the right to goodwill from the other person, the right to be heard, the right to have your own view, the right to be treated with dignity and respect, the right to have your experiences and feelings acknowledged as real, and the right to live free from abuse. Those are just basic rights in a relationship. And uh, I couldn't agree more. So if we're used to being in an abusive relationship, everything that I just read might feel like fantasy land, or, oh, okay, where does that exist? Or that's perfection. People like that don't exist. No, this is all of this kind of behavior. It's the foundations of um, kind of well-adjusted adult behavior. And this isn't about looking for a perfect person. It's looking for a person who is kind of growth oriented and who has that ability to self-soothe and contain themselves to where they can feel however they're going to feel, but that they're still going to be able to treat other people with dignity and respect and not hold everybody emotionally hostage if they're not getting their way. Oh, Marcia says, Dana, going back to the founders of AA, a gentle correction. It's Bill W. and Dr. Bob. I thought both their names were Bill. Well, thank you for correcting me. That's uh, that's wild. I know I'm just questioning everything. That's how did I not know that? Oh my gosh. Um, let's see. North Sea Eyes says, Dana, I can't find the book club discussion about the verbal abuse book. Could you please post a link because it sounds very useful? Let's see. The link, I'm going to post a link, but I will say it's going to change soon because we're updating the website and I hope the new website's going to be up on the 4th. So like next week, but let me see if I can find it on the old site here. Okay. Okay, link is in the chat. So for the time being, and I don't know, this might change, but at least for now, it's thriveafterabuse.com/the verbally abusive relationship. All one word. So, okay, let me get back to okay, I think I'm missing part of your question here, Embers, who says, after I just taught an awesome art therapy workshop called Illustrating My Inner Shiro for friends with anxiety and depression. Maybe my sympathetic crying means I shouldn't do therapy classes. I'm not 100% sure what what you mean with that. Um, is it that you were finding yourself crying in the class and that was not being received uh, in a certain kind of way? Or I will say it can be a hard line to walk, and it's going to be a different line with every single person, with everything across the board when it comes to therapy. So um, that, there's only so much that we can do because everybody's going to perceive things in their own way. So it can be this feeling of, well, um, I was just talking to Paul about this the other day. If you have a therapist, let's say, for example, who's very emotionally neutral, and um, and oftentimes when a therapist does this, it's because we're trying to not um, place our emotion into the situation because we don't know how the situation left you feeling. So, for example, let's say if someone says, um, "Oh, my mom died last week," and if our reaction was, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness, that's awful." Well, we're kind of making a lot of assumptions there. And then the client might be like, "Oh no, actually, it was actually quite a relief. I hated my mother. She was horribly abusive my whole life. Um, I'm just more irritated that I had to take time off work." Right. So then it's sort of like, oh, okay. Now there's this huge disconnect that's kind of awkward and then kind of getting back in sync. So uh, that can be one of the downsides of expressing, um, of emoting kind of in general, is that it might be very out of sync with what that other person's experiencing, and it can kind of cause them to second guess their own emotions of, maybe am I bad or wrong for feeling this way, or feeling very invalidated or alone in their pain of, um, it's just, it's hard when there's such a mismatch of, uh, when people are kind of putting their own emotions into the room, I guess I should say. The downside to being more emotionally neutral and saying something like, "Oh, your mother died. Well, how did that make you feel?" can come across of, "Well, gee, lady, how do you think it made me feel?" Right? Like, she was my mom. I'm devastated. I can't function. So you just, you don't know how, uh, the situation itself isn't enough to know how that person's, the meaning that they're making from that situation. That's kind of the ever present challenge of a therapist. So, but here's the thing: is you don't have to do this perfectly all the time. This is where effective communication and assertiveness comes in. So, letting people know ahead of time of it. So, like in your situation, um, hey, you know what? Um, guys, I I tend to do a lot of crying in this class. I feel like it's such a beautiful thing. People finding themselves, finding their voice, working through all of this. It's just such an overpowering, amazing, um, experience to be able to kind of walk this journey with all of you. And but I just want to, I guess, bring this up, that it can be very awkward for some people. And if that happens, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Because some people in your class are going to be like, "Oh, it's so amazing. And my teacher was so in tune with us. She cried." And other people are going to be completely turned off to it. So um, I think it's better um, to just kind of bring it up, bring it up before it happens, and then open and allow that to be an opening for discussion. So, okay. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, I had okay. Clover asks, "Hey, Dana, I never get along with people. People always hate me. Is that my BPD, or is there something wrong with me? How am I supposed to know?" Well, you know, that's a big question, and I don't have, it's difficult for me to kind of tell, because I don't know you. I haven't seen your behavior in motion, but I guess what kind of sticks out to me with your question is, people always hate you. Is that true? Because the reason I say that is because generally when we use these all or nothing terms, always, every time, never fails, um, this extreme language behind what we're describing, that's very rarely the case. So when people use words like, "Oh, things never work out for me. People always hate me even is extreme." It's one thing for people to not like us, but to hate us, that's really extreme. And so the languaging that you're using, I guess, kind of makes me want to dig a little bit deeper and to think, okay, let's examine. Is it truly everybody? You've never had um, a connection with another person before? And is it truly hating you? There's a lot of energy behind hate. Do they absolutely hate you? Or is there not as close of a connection that you would like? So um, yeah, I guess kind of examining that all or nothing thinking of, or just that extreme kind of, that extreme thinking, always, everything, every time. Um, that tends to be, at a minimum, some very disempowering core beliefs we have about ourselves. And sometimes, oftentimes, that does go hand in hand with BPD, but there's a lot of people out there with BPD that don't. Um, there's a lot of people out there without BPD that still have those disempowering core beliefs. And I'm going to be putting a sheet up on my website here in the next week or so about core beliefs. So you can see that. I think it's just helpful to see the difference between negative core belief, or kind of this maladaptive, I think is a better way to say it, maladaptive or unhelpful core belief, and the alternative, like a more adaptive, helpful core belief. So, and then same with behavior, in terms of kind of problematic behavior and more like adaptive behavior. Let me scroll up. That's a big question. Embers asked, is it a BPD characteristic to be a pathological and illogical liar? It depends. I would say it depends on if there's a theme around the lies. So with again with BPD, it tends to be feelings of unworthiness and fear, really deep-seated, pervasive fear of abandonment. So if there are lies present, it tends to be lies that pull people in to kind of keep relationships going. I I also should add, uh, we touched a little bit on this in the beginning, but it's really important to to note, I guess, that BPD, personality disorders in general, I really do think it's helpful to think of them more as traits. These are all human traits. Nothing that's in the DSM is outside of the realm of human behavior, right? So there is no kind of unveiling like a Scooby-Doo monster of, aha, this person is a narcissist, or aha, this person is a sociopath, kind of thing. It's all within that realm of human behavior. It's the degree and frequency of that behavior that's the problem. Like it's one thing um, to feel jealous or angry, or even to be so angry that you want to hurt somebody, but it's another thing to full on act on that and to kill someone. It's one thing to lie, or uh, normal, quote unquote, normal lies. We tell lies when we're uncomfortable with the truth. You'll find there's a lot of lying that goes hand in hand with people that have difficulties with assertiveness. And with BPD, there's that difficulty with assertiveness because they don't want to rock the boat. So and this manifests in all different kinds of ways. So um, they might be lying to other people, oftentimes saying yes when they mean no, saying that they're fine with something when they're not. They might be lying to themselves about, oh yeah, this is fine, this is no problem. They might be minimizing or justifying a problematic situation. They tend to go to great lengths to avoid to avoid confrontation or conflict. Um, but like I said, the lies that they tell, it might be to kind of keep relationships going, to pull people in. And that can manifest in any number of ways. If it's just lying about anything and everything, lying when maybe that it's not necessarily maybe related to fears of abandonment. If it's lying, they I don't know, lying to impress, or lying to uh, for fun, lying to see if they can get away with it. That kind of stuff. I mean, maybe I would say it's probably on the fringes of it. It's um I don't know. I think that almost kind of goes over into more of narcissism than anything else. Narcissism or antisocial personality disorder. Clover says, well, everyone seems narcissistic and toxic. Am I supposed to have no friends? Because that's what I'd have if I cut out all the toxic people out of my life. I'd have no one. Maybe it is my BPD. Okay, so there are a lot of problematic people out there. And even within, and here, okay, let me just back up completely. Is everybody at one point or another is going to cross a boundary with you, with me, with everybody, because nobody else knows where our boundaries are. And the again, the degree and frequency that another person crosses our boundary, it, that's that depends. But if a person, so this is why it's very important for us to be able to assert ourselves. If someone who let's say has shown more often than not that they are very respect that they value our boundaries, and um, um, they're just trying, I don't know, they're very insistent on getting their way or whatever, they're holding their position but it's violating our boundary, to continue to make that known. And a lot of people that struggle with assertiveness or have that anxious style of attachment or have BPD really struggle with assertiveness. And so they either go to being aggressive and feeling like, oh, well, you're mean, you're cruel, you're abusive for having this boundary with me, or lashing out at others. If their boundary gets pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed enough, then they finally lash out. Or um, they start building up resentment, thinking, well, you should know where my boundaries are. I shouldn't have to tell you this time and again. So all of that is a problem. Really, the only way to navigate, the only way to have a healthy relationship is to have one that's created. And that is a moment to moment thing. It's not a one and done. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to find a healthy person out there. It's not that. Because even the healthiest, most well adjusted person, if we don't know where our boundaries are or when they're crossed or how to assert them or any of that, if we don't know that, that relationship will turn toxic. So, really understanding the importance of being able to communicate effectively is absolutely vital, for having healthy relationships with others. And oftentimes, when people first start learning about all of this, generally like narcissists, it's other people, right? It's the behavior of other people that's so outrageous and causes us so much pain that is what catches our attention, and then we're highly motivated to to learn about it so we can avoid it in the future. That's what tends to bring people here. And um and it can take a little bit to realize, oh, okay, you know kind of focusing on ourselves, focusing on, uh, you know, any any imbalances or problematic behavior that we might have. And if we haven't had boundaries, or if we haven't known how to effectively assert our boundaries for a very long time, then yeah, everybody around us is going to feel very narcissistic and toxic, because there hasn't been that there hasn't been a real relationship present. It's been us letting them have their way the whole time. And also, I will say there's also a very good chance that if we haven't had boundaries, that we do have a lot of problematic people in our life. No matter how great our assertiveness skills get, if our longstanding pattern, um, if we haven't been selective or discerning about who we let in our inner circle, and we just kind of let anybody in, then yeah, it's a mixed bag. And it's a very real possibility that you just need to start from scratch. And there's a lot of us, I think, that had to do that or came very close to it. So, um, yeah, it's a reshuffling for sure of our inner circle. Okay, let me um let's see. Gosh, okay, we're already going on 2 hours. No wonder I'm hungry. It's like 8:45. Um, let's see. Let me scroll. There was a part in here about some question. Oh, here they are. Some questions to ask yourself. And I really this might be my favorite part in the whole book. I just really love this. So, some of the questions to ask yourself is, do you minimize or lie about the BP's behavior, borderline person's behavior? Do others ask you why are you still in this relationship? Do you stay out of obligation even if the relationship is sinking you? What do you want from this relationship? What do you need from this relationship? How open can you be with your feelings with this person? Are you putting yourself in physical and I'll add emotional danger by staying in this relationship? How does this decision to stay in this relationship affect any children you may or might have? And here's a good one. How does this relationship affect my self esteem? Do you love yourself as much as you love the person with BP or BPD? Have you accepted the fact that the person with BPD will only start to change once they're ready to do so? Are you able to wait until that happens or live with things if it never happens? I think that's the bigger question. And I'd also add to that, what kind of changes do you need to happen? What kind of changes do you need to see happen and in what time frame? That'll that'll give you a lot of clarity right there. A lot of people I think are on that line with should I stay or should I go with their marriage especially. And and then they're holding on to hope. Well, okay, finally this person said that they're ready to get into therapy or that things are going to be different. And so it's really worth the time of thinking, okay, well, like I said before, therapy isn't something we do to a person, it's something that we do with a person. But sometimes it takes a long time and sometimes the needle doesn't move very far. So what kind of changes are you needing to see and in what time frame? Do you believe that you have the right to be happy? When are you currently the most content? Is it when you're with this other person, alone, or with others? Do you believe that you only have value when you're sacrificing yourself for others? So, those were some great questions from the book. And um, yeah, definitely worth reflecting upon. So, okay, well, um, with that said, the book that we were discussing tonight is called Stop Walking on Eggshells, Taking Your Life Back When Someone You Care About Has Borderline Personality Disorder. It's by Paul Mason and Randy Krieger. I think it's, there's a lot to like about this book. Like I said, there's a few issues that I had with it, but frankly, I think the loved ones of a person, those that have those that have a loved one with BPD, like I mentioned before, some of this behavior that they describe in the book is pretty extreme. But at the same time, I think those that have a loved one with BPD that are to the point where they're seeking out support groups and they're seeking out books to help them better understand this behavior, they're experiencing extreme behavior. So in some ways, it kind of fits their audience. But at the same time, I just really want to make it known that borderline personality disorder, it's on a spectrum, and not all people with BPD are malicious or um, abusive or any of that. And it's a very um, um, I would imagine a very challenging disorder to live with for the person and for those around them. And it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to have standards and it's okay to have deal breakers. And it's okay. You can still love a person um, and have healthy boundaries. So with that being said, the book we're going to read next month for February of 2021 is called The Four Agreements. It's a very short read, but I mean, like I said, it's been a long time since I've read this book, but I remember really liking it. It was very popular. I want to say like back in the 90s, maybe early 90s. It's okay. So it's called The Four Agreements, A Practical Guide to Personal Freedom, and it's by Don Miguel Ruiz. So I hope you join me. We'll be discussing that book the last Thursday of February at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you'd like to join in the discussion, you just show up. You don't have to read the book, but if you want to and you want to discuss it more in depth, you're absolutely welcome to. And if you would like to have a notification of when I go live, either on Wednesday nights or my live streams with Angie or for book club or whatnot, you can text the word Dana Live, all one word, to the number 22999. And if you are interested in receiving some words of encouragement, which I send out about 3 or 4 times a week, you can text the words, all one word, I thrive, to the number 22999. You have to text uh, to, to both. So to sign up for both of them. Okay. So with that said, thank you guys so much for being here and participating. I hope that we covered kind of what you were hoping to cover in this book. These notes will be up on my website after February 4th when we go live with the new site. And as always, just lots of love to you guys. You're not alone. You're not crazy. And you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care and have a delightful evening. Okay. Good night.